The Mafia boss froze when the black maid whispered a warning and saved him from a blade hidden in his child's gift. It was a lavish evening at the Moretti mansion. The grand chandelier cast a golden hue over the marble floors, and the air was thick with laughter and chatter. Victor Moretti, the notorious Mafia boss, sat at the center of the room, a stoic figure dressed in an impeccable black suit. His sharp features gave him the aura of someone who had seen it all and feared nothing. Around him, the elite of the city gathered, sipping wine and discussing business, oblivious to the tension that was quietly building. Among the crowd, Lena Johnson, a black maid who had been employed at the mansion for the past few months, moved silently between the guests, her eyes lowered as she did her work. She had grown used to being invisible in such a lavish setting. No one noticed her unless they needed something cleaned or served. Yet, tonight, something felt different. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, as if the air itself was charged with an unspoken danger. As she refilled glasses and cleared plates, Lena's gaze fell on the extravagant gift placed under the tree, a delicate, velvet-wrapped box. It was meant to be a gift for Victor's son, Marco, a gesture from a wealthy associate. But something about it didn't sit right with her. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden inside, something dangerous. Her instincts, honed over years of living in the margins of society, screamed at her to pay attention. Lena moved closer to the gift, carefully inspecting it as she did. Her fingers trembled ever so slightly as she ran them over the edges of the box. She had no proof, no solid reason for suspicion, but her gut told her that something wasn't right. Her eyes darted across the room, her heart racing as she caught a glimpse of the blade hidden inside the gift, a dangerous, sharp edge that could easily be concealed by the delicate fabric. It was then that her mind raced. She couldn't let Victor or anyone else know what she had found. The consequences would be unimaginable. But what if she was wrong? What if she was just being paranoid? Yet, she couldn't shake the feeling of impending disaster. With a glance toward Victor, who was deep in conversation with one of his associates, Lena made a split-second decision. She had to warn him. As she approached him, her heart pounded in her chest. The noise around her seemed to fade as she focused on the task at hand. She leaned in close to Victor, her breath barely audible as she whispered, "Run now." Victor's dark eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. The room, once filled with laughter and conversation, suddenly felt like a distant memory. In that split second, Lena's warning cut through the chaos, and Victor's stoic expression faltered. He stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock, processing what had just been said. Lena knew she had just changed the course of his life. Without another word, she stepped back, her heart still racing. The seconds felt like hours. Then, without warning, Victor sprang into action, his instincts kicking in. He shouted orders to his security team, and within seconds, the room erupted into motion. The gift, once a symbol of generosity, was now a threat that could have ended it all. And through it all, Lena stood silently, a witness to the power of a single whispered word. Victor Moretti's heart was still racing as his security team scrambled into action. The guests around him, initially unaware of the tension building in the room, were now caught in the chaos of the moment. Conversations halted, and the quiet buzz of the party turned into an uneasy silence. The massive chandelier above flickered with the sudden rush of movement below, casting erratic shadows across the marble floors. Lena, standing at the edge of the room, felt her pulse quicken. She had warned him. She had done what she could, but now, she could only watch as the scene unfolded before her. She had never been part of this world of power, of the life that Victor Moretti led. Yet, in this single moment, her instincts had guided her into a role far bigger than she had ever imagined. Victor's usually cold, controlled demeanor faltered for the briefest of moments as he processed what had just happened. His eyes locked onto Lena's, a silent understanding passing between them. His security personnel, armed and alert, surrounded him instantly. They knew what to do. They had been trained for moments like this. But this was different. This wasn't just a threat to his life. It was a threat to his family. Victor's thoughts raced, and for a brief second, he wondered how Lena had known. How had she, a maid, seen what his most trusted bodyguards had missed? He had hired the best to protect his family, but it was a maid, someone he had dismissed as invisible, who had just saved his life. As his team moved quickly to secure the area, Victor's mind returned to Lena. She was standing there, her hands still trembling from the adrenaline, her face a mix of concern and determination. She had no idea how much she had just changed everything. For Victor, a man used to controlling every aspect of his life, this was a rare moment of helplessness. He couldn't afford to let this slip by unnoticed. "Lena," he called out, his voice firm but not without a hint of gratitude. She flinched slightly at the sound of her name, and her eyes flickered towards him. She hadn't expected him to speak to her, not like this. "Yes, sir," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. For a moment, Victor said nothing. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He had never paid much attention to her before. She was just a maid, another face in the crowd. But now, as he stood there, surrounded by his people, he realized something. She was not just a maid. She was someone with an awareness, a strength, and an ability to see through the facade of wealth and power that surrounded him. "What made you warn me?" he asked, his tone softer than usual, as though he was genuinely curious. Lena took a slow breath, her mind still reeling from the intensity of the moment. She had never been asked such a question by someone like him, someone who had always been untouchable, larger than life. But now, with the danger averted and the weight of the moment pressing down on her, she spoke from her heart. "I saw the gift," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew something was wrong. I couldn't just stand by." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her decision. She had risked everything, her job, her safety, for a man who hadn't even noticed her until that moment. Victor nodded slowly, taking in her words. He had always believed that power was about control, about domination. But this moment, this warning from Lena, made him question everything he thought he knew. He had built his empire on fear and respect, but what if true loyalty, true protection, came from something else? Something more human. His mind was racing, but his gaze never left Lena. "You saved my son," he said, his voice low. "You've done more for this family than anyone else in this room." Lena swallowed hard, the weight of his words settling over her. She wasn't used to being acknowledged like this, especially not by someone like Victor Moretti. "It was nothing," she said, shaking her head. I couldn't let anything happen to him." Victor studied her for a long moment, then glanced over at the gift that had caused all the chaos. His son Marco, who had been playing in the corner, unaware of the danger that had almost befallen him, was now being comforted by one of the other staff members. He was safe. That was all that mattered. But as Victor looked back at Lena, something inside him shifted. He realized that, in her quiet, unassuming way, Lena had just shown him the greatest act of loyalty he had ever witnessed. "I want you to stay," he said, his voice firm again, but this time with a sense of finality. Lena's eyes widened in confusion. "Stay, sir?" she asked, not understanding what he meant. "I want you to stay in this family's service, not as a maid, but as someone who can be trusted. You have proven your loyalty, and I won't forget that." His words were a rare promise, one that, in Victor's world, was not easily given. But in this moment, he knew it was the right thing to do. Lena stood frozen for a moment, her mind struggling to catch up with his words. She had come into this job as a way to survive, to make ends meet. But now, she found herself in the middle of a life-or-death situation, one that had changed everything. For the first time, she felt seen, not just as a maid, but as someone who mattered. Victor looked at her once more, his eyes softer now, almost vulnerable. "Thank you, Lena," he said quietly. "You've done more than I ever expected." Victor sat in his study, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on him. His mansion, which had once felt like a fortress, now seemed fragile, vulnerable. His fingers tapped restlessly on the arm of his chair as he reflected on the events that had unfolded. Lena, a maid he had barely noticed until today, had not only saved his life but also revealed a depth of loyalty and intelligence he had never expected from someone in her position. He knew he couldn't let this moment pass without acknowledging it, without doing something to show his gratitude. Outside his study, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. Victor looked up just as the door to his office opened, and Lena stepped in, her presence barely noticeable as usual. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Her voice was steady, but Victor could sense the underlying nervousness in her tone. She had no idea what he was about to say, no idea how much her actions had impacted him. He stood and walked over to his desk, gathering his thoughts. "Lena," he said, his voice calm but filled with a newfound respect. "What you did today, it was more than just a warning. You saved my family. You saved my son. And for that, I owe you more than just my gratitude." Lena shifted uncomfortably, clearly taken aback by his words. She had never expected this. She had never expected anything from him. "I was just doing my job, sir," she replied, lowering her eyes. Victor smiled, a rare gesture that softened his usually stern expression. "Your job, yes. But your actions went beyond what anyone could have expected. You've earned my respect, Lena. More than that, you've earned a place here, if you want it." Lena looked up at him, confusion and disbelief crossing her face. "A place here? Sir, I don't understand." Victor stepped closer, his gaze steady. "I don't expect you to continue in your current role, Lena. You've shown me that you have more to offer. More than just cleaning rooms and serving drinks. I want you to stay, to work directly with me. You'll have a position of trust, one where your instincts and intelligence will be valued." Lena stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. This wasn't happening. This wasn't the life she had ever envisioned for herself. She had worked as a maid because it was the only job she could find, not because she ever expected to be in the inner circle of a powerful man like Victor Moretti. She had never been seen like this before. She had never mattered to anyone in such a way. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't make sense of it all. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. Victor nodded, understanding the weight of what he was offering. He had seen the hesitation in her eyes, the uncertainty that had crept into her expression. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said gently. "Take your time. But understand this, you are not just a maid here. You are someone who matters. You've proven that today." Lena blinked, fighting back the sudden rush of emotion. She had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. But there was also a warmth spreading through her chest, something she hadn't felt in a long time. Respect. For the first time in her life, someone was seeing her for who she truly was. Not just a servant. Not just someone who cleaned up after the rich and powerful. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. Victor looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without a word, he turned back to his desk, picking up a file and placing it in front of her. "There's something I need you to look at," he said, his voice shifting back to business. Lena approached the desk, glancing at the file he had set down. It was thick, filled with documents that looked far too official for her liking. She could feel the weight of it already, the burden of whatever responsibility was being thrust upon her. But she didn't hesitate. She opened the file, her fingers tracing the words on the page. As she scanned through the contents, something caught her eye, a detail that didn't seem to add up. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar pattern. "This clause," she murmured, pointing to a section of the document. "It's a trap. The wording here gives the other party all the leverage. It's designed to fail." Victor leaned over her shoulder, his brow furrowing as he read the section she had pointed to. For a moment, the room was silent. Then, slowly, Victor straightened and looked at Lena, her to see what others couldn't, to make decisions that could alter the course of their world. It was a level of responsibility she had never thought possible for someone like her. As she sat there, going over the papers, Lena couldn't help but feel the weight of Victor's eyes on her. He had been watching her closely ever since she had saved his life, and now it seemed like he was looking at her differently. He wasn't just a boss anymore. There was something more there, something unspoken between them. Every time their eyes met, there was a flicker of something deeper, something she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. She had always kept her distance from people like Victor Moretti. She had never imagined she would be in a position where her actions would have consequences for someone like him. But here she was, alone with him in his study, a part of his world now. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying. She turned her attention back to the file, focusing on the numbers, the clauses, the intricate details that most people would overlook. Her mind worked quickly, piecing together patterns and inconsistencies that others had missed. As she did, she realized something. This was what she had always wanted. Not wealth, not power, but the ability to make a difference, to be seen for what she could do, not who she was. And now, she had that chance. "What do you think?" Victor's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to the present. She looked up, meeting his gaze. He was standing by the door, watching her with a quiet intensity. "It's clever," Lena said, pointing to a section of the contract. "The terms seem standard, but the underlying clauses are designed to exploit loopholes. Whoever drafted this knew exactly what they were doing." Victor stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the section she had pointed out. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice laced with an edge of curiosity. Lena nodded, feeling a surge of confidence. "I'm sure. The wording is too vague. If you sign this, you'll be bound to an agreement that leaves you with no options." Victor's face darkened as he absorbed her words. "I'll have to consult with my legal team," he said, his voice cold and calculating. Lena felt a flash of pride at her ability to see through the legal jargon that had eluded even the most experienced professionals. It was a small victory, but it meant more to her than she could express. "You've saved me again," Victor said, his tone softer this time. Lena felt a heat rise in her cheeks at his words. She wasn't used to hearing such praise, especially not from someone like him. But she pushed the feeling aside, focusing on the task at hand. "It's nothing," she replied, her voice steady. "It's just what I do." Victor studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "No, Lena. This isn't just what you do. This is more. You're not just cleaning up messes anymore. You're helping to build something. Something much bigger than either of us." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their implications. Lena opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She was still processing everything he had just said. Was he really offering her a future here? A future where she wasn't just the invisible maid, but someone who mattered? She wasn't sure if she was ready to accept that, but a part of her wanted to believe it. "I need you to help me with something," Victor said, pulling her from her thoughts. "I need you to take over the operation with the legal team. You'll be working directly with my trusted advisors to ensure that we don't make the same mistake again." Lena nodded, her mind racing. She had never imagined that she would be entrusted with something like this, but she couldn't deny the sense of purpose it gave her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was becoming a part of something that mattered. "I won't let you down," she said quietly, her voice firm with determination. Victor's eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. "I know you won't," he said. "You've already proven that." Lena sat in the quiet of Victor's office, the weight of his trust heavier on her shoulders than ever before. The documents she had reviewed, the legal traps she had spotted, all of it felt like a puzzle she was only beginning to piece together. She had never imagined herself in this position, working alongside Victor Moretti, a man known for his cold efficiency, someone who controlled everything around him. But now, she was not just a maid. She was someone who had been recognized for her abilities, for her sharp mind, and her intuition. Yet, with every passing moment, the pressure grew. She knew she had earned his respect, but she also knew that with that respect came responsibility. There was no turning back now. As she glanced at the file in front of her, the pages seemed to blur together. There were contracts, financials, legal strategies, all intricately laid out before her. But the underlying reality was simple. The stakes were high. Victor had made it clear that the future of the Moretti family rested on the decisions they made in the coming weeks, and Lena was now a key part of that. She had proven herself once. But could she continue to do so? Could she handle the weight of what Victor was asking of her? A soft knock at the door startled her, breaking her from her thoughts. She looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway, his tall figure casting a long shadow in the dim light of the office. His usual cold demeanor was softened by something she hadn't seen before, a flicker of appreciation, maybe even trust. "Lena," he said, his voice steady but not as detached as usual. "How are you holding up?" His question caught her off guard. She hadn't expected him to check in on her. It wasn't like him to show concern, at least not outwardly. "I'm fine, sir," she replied, keeping her voice calm. "It's just a lot to take in." Victor nodded, stepping further into the room. "I understand, but I need to be sure that you're ready for what's next. This is not a small task we're facing. The risks are enormous, and I can't afford to have anyone make a mistake." His words were direct, but there was a subtle undercurrent of something deeper, something that wasn't just about business. Lena felt her stomach tighten at the weight of his words. She had known from the moment she had stepped into this role that there was no room for error, but hearing it so plainly from him made it all the more real. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, though inside, She was questioning whether she was truly ready for the responsibility Victor was placing on her. Victor looked at her, his gaze unwavering. For a moment, there was silence between them, the air thick with the unspoken understanding that things were changing. He wasn't just offering her a job anymore. He was offering her a place in the heart of his world. A world that was powerful, dangerous, and, in many ways, out of her reach. Good, he said, breaking the silence. Because I'm counting on you. His words settled over her like a weight, but also something else, something that felt like an unspoken challenge. Lena swallowed hard, nodding once. She had made it this far, hadn't she? There was no turning back now. Victor turned and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Lena followed his gaze, her mind still racing with everything that had happened. The view from his office was breathtaking. The city spread out like a sea of lights, each one representing something or someone important. But for Lena, that view felt distant, unreachable. She was still on the outside, looking in. Or was she? Lena, Victor's voice cut through her thoughts. I want you to stay on top of the legal team. You'll be handling a lot of sensitive information, so I need to trust you completely. You'll be the one to make sure we don't get caught in any more traps like the one we nearly fell into with the last deal. She nodded, her heart racing. This was what she had been waiting for. An opportunity to prove herself not just as someone who cleaned up messes, but as someone who could be a vital part of the operation. She had always known she was capable of more, but now, she had to show it. Understood, sir, she said, her voice firm with resolve. Victor's eyes shifted back to her, his expression unreadable. I'm glad to hear that. You've done well so far, Lena. I expect nothing less going forward. With that, he turned and walked to the door, pausing just before exiting. Remember, you're not just working for me anymore. You're part of this family's future. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Lena alone in the silence of the office. She exhaled slowly, her hands still gripping the file in front of her. This was it. She had made her decision. There was no going back. She was in this, and she was going to prove to herself, and to Victor, that she belonged here, that she had a place in this world. She had never imagined she would be part of. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing on the edge of something big. The question was, could she handle it? Lena had been working tirelessly for days, her mind consumed with the responsibility Victor had placed upon her. Every decision she made felt heavier than the last, and as she sat at her desk late one evening, she found herself reflecting on just how much had changed since the day she had warned him about the blade hidden in the gift. What had started as a simple act of courage had turned into something far more complicated. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was now in charge of overseeing the legal strategies that kept Victor's empire intact, and with that came an immense amount of pressure. She had reviewed contracts, caught discrepancies that others had missed, and earned a level of trust from Victor that few ever received. Yet, the weight of her new role was beginning to sink in, and Lena couldn't help but feel like she was standing on the edge of something much larger than herself. Her mind raced as she looked over the documents in front of her, scanning through the intricate legal language, trying to make sense of it all. She had always been good at this, but now, the stakes were so much higher. The Moretti family wasn't just about making money. It was about power, control, and maintaining a delicate balance that could tip at any moment. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts, and she looked up to find Victor standing in the doorway, his presence commanding as usual. Lena, he said, his voice steady but with an underlying hint of something more. We need to talk. She nodded, her heart picking up pace. This wasn't a casual conversation. She could tell by the look in his eyes. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, but Lena had learned that Victor's silences were just as telling as his words. I've been thinking about your progress, he began, his gaze fixed on her. You've done well. You've proven that you can handle this role, but there's more to it than just legal contracts. There's something I need from you, something I haven't asked of anyone before. Lena's breath caught in her throat. She had already proven herself, hadn't she? But now, it seemed like there was more to this than just numbers and words on a page. What is it? She asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension in her chest. Victor paused for a moment before speaking again. I need you to take a more active role in the family's business. I'm not asking you to leave your position with the legal team, but I need you to be involved in more of the day-to-day decisions. You've shown me that you have instincts that I can trust. Now, I want you to use those instincts to help guide the family forward." Lena's mind raced. This was what she had been preparing for, but now that the moment had arrived, it felt more daunting than she had imagined. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm already doing everything I can. I'm overseeing the legal matters, helping to ensure that everything is running smoothly. What else do you need from me?" Victor stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I need you to be my eyes and ears in this family," he said, his voice low and intense. "There are people within the organization who are too close to me to see the bigger picture. I need you to watch over them, to keep an eye on everything. You've shown that you can think beyond the surface, beyond the politics. I need you to keep me informed. And more importantly, I need you to be a part of the decisions that will shape the future of this family." Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about reviewing documents or managing contracts anymore. This was about becoming part of the inner circle, about stepping into a world she had never truly understood. She wasn't just a maid. She wasn't just someone cleaning up messes. She was being asked to help guide the future of one of the most powerful crime families in the city. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at Victor, unsure of what to say next. She had always dreamed of a better life, of being seen for her intellect and her worth. But this was something entirely different. She had entered this world by accident, but now it seemed like there was no going back. "Are you sure you want me to be involved in this way?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Victor's gaze softened, though his expression remained serious. "I'm sure," he said, his voice steady. "I've never trusted anyone like I trust you, and that's why I need you by my side. The decisions ahead won't be easy, Lena, but I believe you're the one who can help guide us through them." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Lena had never felt more exposed, more vulnerable. But she also knew that this was the moment she had been waiting for. This was her chance to prove to herself that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just part of the team anymore. She was becoming a key player in the game. She stood up from her desk, meeting Victor's gaze head-on. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "I'll help guide this family, and I won't let you down." Victor nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. "I knew I could count on you, Lena. Together, we'll make sure that the Moretti family continues to thrive. There's no turning back now." The weight of his words settled over her, but she didn't feel fear. She felt determination. She was ready. Lena's mind raced as she walked down the corridor of the Moretti mansion. She had made her decision, but the weight of her new responsibilities felt heavier than ever. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind. From the moment Victor had asked her to be a part of the Moretti family's future, everything had changed. She was no longer just an observer, no longer just a maid. She was now a key player in a world she had once only observed from a distance. The decision she had made wasn't easy. Working alongside Victor meant stepping into a world of power, danger, and complexity. She wasn't sure if she was ready, but deep down, she knew she had no choice. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire life. As she walked toward Victor's office, the echoes of her footsteps seemed to emphasize her uncertainty. What would this new role mean for her? How much of herself would she have to give away in order to succeed? In a world that thrived on control and manipulation? She couldn't deny the nervousness in her chest, but she also felt a sense of determination that had never been there before. The door to Victor's office opened, and she stepped inside. He was sitting at his desk, going over some paperwork. He looked up as she entered, his eyes meeting hers with the usual intensity. "Lena," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "Come in. I need your help with something." She nodded, taking a seat across from him. She had learned over the past few weeks that Victor's calm demeanor often masked a sharp mind that never missed a detail. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Victor pushed a stack of documents toward her. "These are the reports from our various operations. I need you to review them. Make sure there are no discrepancies. I need to know that everything is running smoothly. If anything is off, I want to know." Lena glanced at the papers, her mind already shifting into work mode. She had spent the past few days getting familiar with the inner workings of the Moretti family, and she had learned that their operations were far-reaching and complex. "I'll go over them right away," she replied, feeling the familiar sense of focus settle in. Victor nodded and leaned back in his chair, watching her with a mix of expectation and approval. He knew he had made the right choice in bringing her into this role. She had proven herself time and time again, not just with her legal expertise, but with her ability to think critically and act decisively. As Lena reviewed the documents, she couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. She was no longer just cleaning the mansion, serving the guests, or hiding in the background. She was trusted with the family's most sensitive information, tasked with ensuring that nothing slipped through the cracks. It was a lot of pressure, but it was also a position she had never dreamed she would have. She moved through the reports quickly, her eyes scanning for any irregularities. There were a few small details that didn't add up, but nothing that seemed too alarming. She made a few notes, and then looked up at Victor. There are some minor discrepancies, but nothing that poses a significant risk, she said. I'll send a report to the legal team to address them. Victor nodded, his lips curling into a small smile. Good. Keep me updated. Lena stood up, gathering the documents in front of her. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, where her opinion mattered, where her observations were valued. As she turned to leave the office, Victor's voice stopped her. Lena, he said, his tone softer than usual. She paused and looked back at him, waiting for him to continue. I appreciate everything you've done, he said, his gaze unwavering. I know this isn't an easy world to navigate, but you're doing well. You've earned my trust, and that's not something I give lightly. Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had never expected to hear something like that from him. Victor Moretti was a man who didn't hand out praise easily. To hear him acknowledge her efforts, to know that he valued her, meant more than she could say. Thank you, she said quietly, her voice filled with sincerity. Victor nodded, his expression softening for a moment. You're a part of this family now, Lena, he said, and we protect our own. She didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded and left the room, her mind still reeling from his words. As she walked down the hallway, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She was no longer the invisible maid, the one who faded into the background. She was someone who mattered. She was part of something bigger than herself. The weight of that thought was both empowering and terrifying, but one thing was clear, there was no going back. She had entered a world where power was everything, and now, she was a part of it. And for the first time in her life, Lena felt like she was finally where she belonged. Lena walked through the mansion's grand hall, her steps echoing in the quiet stillness. It had been a few weeks since Victor had entrusted her with the responsibility of overseeing the Moretti family's operations, and every day, the weight of the role seemed to grow heavier. She had proven herself time and time again, but now, the stakes were higher. The trust Victor had placed in her was something she couldn't afford to take lightly. She wasn't just handling legal matters anymore. She was becoming the linchpin of his entire empire, the one person he could rely on to ensure everything stayed in balance. As she entered her small office off to the side of the mansion, she took a deep breath, steadying herself before sitting down at her desk. The papers before her were endless: contracts, business proposals, security plans. But today, something felt different. She wasn't just looking at them. She was seeing them through a new lens. Her role had shifted from mere observer to active decision-maker. She had learned more in the past few weeks than she ever thought possible, but now, the realization hit her. There was no turning back. She was no longer just a maid, a forgotten face in the crowd. She was now integral to the family's operations, someone who had a direct influence on its future. As Lena ran her fingers across the papers in front of her, she heard a soft knock at the door. She looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway, his imposing figure filling the frame. Despite the power he wielded, there was something in his gaze that made him seem less like a Mafia boss and more like a man with a purpose. Lena, he said, his voice calm but with a hint of urgency. We need to talk. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure what he wanted, but she knew it was important. She stood quickly, meeting his gaze with a mixture of respect and curiosity. What is it, sir? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind him. He didn't sit down, instead choosing to stand by her desk, his posture straight and commanding. There was a certain intensity in his demeanor that made her heart race, but she refused to show any sign of nervousness. I've been reviewing some of the latest reports, Victor began, his tone more serious than usual. And there's something I need to address. We've been facing some challenges lately, some from within the family itself. I need someone who can keep an eye on things, someone who can be objective and not get caught up in the politics. Lena's mind raced. Was he asking her to do something even more involved? Was she ready for that? I understand, she replied, her voice steady, though her heart pounded in her chest. What do you need me to do? Victor studied her for a moment, as though weighing his words carefully. I need you to start investigating the other members of the family, he said. There are some who I trust less than others. I need you to be discreet, gather information, and report back to me. I know you can do this. Lena froze for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. He wanted her to be his eyes and ears, to dig into the very people she had once seen as untouchable. But there was no hesitation in Victor's voice. This was an order. She had to do this. Of course, she replied, her voice unwavering. I'll keep you updated. Victor nodded, a look of approval flashing across his face. I'm counting on you, he said, turning to leave the room. But before he left, he paused at the door and turned back to face her. And Lena, he said quietly, his voice softer now. You're not just working for me anymore. You're a part of this family. Don't forget that. His words hung in the air long after he had left. Lena stood there, her mind racing as she processed what he had just said. She had never felt more torn in her life. She was part of something much bigger than herself now, something dangerous. And yet, in this world of power and secrets, she couldn't help but feel like she had finally found her place. She wasn't just cleaning up messes anymore. She was in control of her own fate, and with that came power and responsibility. She took a deep breath and sat back down at her desk, her hands resting on the papers in front of her. She had a task to complete, and she would do it, just as she had done everything else since stepping into this new life. There was no turning back now. Lena sat in her small office, the papers in front of her feeling heavier than ever. The task Victor had given her was clear: to gather information on the members of the Moretti family, the very people she had once viewed with a sense of awe and fear. Now, she was tasked with observing them closely, seeing beyond their masks, and reporting back on what she found. It was a role she had never imagined herself in, but here she was, at the heart of the operation. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her with each passing moment. Her mind kept returning to Victor's words. You're a part of this family now. It was a statement that rang in her ears, both a reassurance and a burden. She had never expected to find herself in this position, never thought she would be so involved in a world that seemed so far removed from everything she had known. But there was no going back now. Lena stood and walked to the window, looking out at the sprawling city below. The lights twinkled like a sea of stars, each one a story, a life, a secret. She was now a part of that world, a world that was defined by power and loyalty, by decisions that could change everything with a single word. She had made the choice to step into this world, and there was no turning back. But the question remained: could she handle the weight of it all? Could she continue to navigate this delicate balance between loyalty to Victor and the knowledge that the people around her, the people she had once trusted, might be hiding secrets of their own? Lena's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She turned to see one of Victor's associates standing in the doorway, a man she had seen a few times but hadn't yet had the chance to get to know. Miss Johnson, he said, his voice polite but somewhat guarded. Victor asked me to bring you these. He stepped inside, placing a folder on her desk before turning to leave. Lena watched him go, her mind already working through the implications of the new documents in front of her. She opened the folder and began to scan the contents, her eyes quickly darting over the details. These were reports from various members of the family, business dealings, and personal notes. Nothing too unusual at first glance. But as she read further, she began to notice discrepancies, small details that didn't quite add up. The transactions were too smooth, the language too vague. It was clear that someone had been hiding something. Lena's heart began to race as she absorbed the information. She had been tasked with finding these details, but now that she had, she realized just how dangerous the game she was playing really was. She wasn't just uncovering secrets. She was becoming a part of them. She had to be careful. There was no one she could trust fully in this world, not even Victor. He had brought her in, given her this responsibility. But what did that mean for her future here? Could she trust him as much as he seemed to trust her? The thought unsettled her, but she pushed it aside for now. She had work to do. She couldn't afford to get lost in doubt. As she reviewed the documents, she felt a sense of purpose building inside her. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She wasn't just a woman from the shadows. She was someone who could change the course of events, someone whose decisions could make or break the family she had now become a part of. With a deep breath, Lena picked up the phone and dialed the number for Victor's office. The line rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Lena," Victor said, his tone warm but expectant. "What do you have for me?" She hesitated for just a moment before speaking. "I found something," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "There are discrepancies in the reports. It looks like someone's been hiding something. The transactions don't add up." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Lena could hear the sound of papers rustling, the sharp intake of breath. "Are you sure?" Victor asked, his voice suddenly serious. "I'm sure," Lena replied. "I've reviewed everything. The details are there." "Good work," he said, his tone shifting back to one of approval. "I'll have my people look into it. But keep this between us for now. We don't want to alert anyone just yet." Lena nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Understood. I'll continue to monitor everything." "I'm counting on you," Victor said before the line went quiet. Lena hung up the phone, her mind racing. She had just taken another step deeper into a world of secrets and power. The Moretti family was a labyrinth of hidden motives and dangerous games, and Lena was now at the center of it all. She wasn't sure where this path would lead, but she knew one thing. There was no turning back now. She had to stay focused, keep her wits sharp, and trust her instincts. She had been chosen for this role because of her ability to see what others couldn't, and she wasn't about to let Victor down. The power, the responsibility, it was all hers now, and she would use it to change the course of the family's future, no matter what the cost. Lena sat at her desk, her fingers lightly grazing the edge of the document in front of her. The weight of what had been unfolding over the past weeks pressed down on her, but there was a quiet determination in her chest. She had been placed in a position of trust within the Moretti family, a position that came with both opportunity and risk. As Victor had requested, she had been keeping a close eye on things, watching the movements of the family and the people surrounding them. It had been difficult, at times, to reconcile her loyalty to Victor with the knowledge that the family she was now a part of was not as clear-cut as it seemed. There were alliances, hidden motives, and a tangled web of business deals that were far from straightforward. She had uncovered small pieces of information that didn't quite align, but nothing substantial enough to warrant action, yet. Her mind lingered on one of the reports she had seen earlier that day, a set of figures that didn't match up with what was being said in the meetings. They were small discrepancies, things that could easily be dismissed if no one was paying attention. But Lena was paying attention. She had always had an eye for details, something she had honed over the years of living in the shadows, watching the world from a distance. Now, her role had changed, but that skill remained invaluable. A knock on the door broke her concentration, and she looked up to see one of Victor's associates standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sense of urgency in his posture. "Miss Johnson," he said, stepping inside. "Victor needs you in his office." Lena's pulse quickened. She had been anticipating this moment. Every time Victor called her to his office, it meant something important was happening. She stood up, collecting the files she had been reviewing. "Lead the way," she said, her voice steady despite the anticipation that gripped her. The associate nodded and turned, leading her down the hallway to Victor's private study. As they approached the door, Lena couldn't help but wonder what Victor had found. Had her suspicions been confirmed? Was he aware of the things she had noticed? Or was this about something else entirely? The door opened, and she stepped inside, meeting Victor's gaze. His eyes were sharp, focused, but there was something different about his expression today, something that made Lena's heart race. "Lena," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "I need you to handle something important." She nodded, her nerves steadying as she took a seat across from him. He pushed a file across the desk to her. It was a thick, confidential-looking stack of papers. "These are some of the deals we've been working on. I need you to go through them with a fine-tooth comb," he continued. "There's something off about a few of them, and I need you to identify where the weaknesses are. We can't afford to make any mistakes." Lena took the file and opened it, scanning the first few pages. Her mind immediately began working, analyzing the numbers, the clauses, the patterns that had been woven into the text. It was clear to her now that Victor had been right. There were irregularities, not just in one deal, but in several. The discrepancies were small, but they added up quickly. If left unchecked, they could easily lead to problems down the road. As she flipped through the pages, she could feel the weight of Victor's trust in her pressing down on her. She wasn't just doing her job anymore. She was protecting the future of the Moretti family, and that responsibility was something she took seriously. "This is more complicated than I thought," she said softly, her eyes still fixed on the documents. Victor didn't respond immediately, allowing her time to process the information. He knew she had the skills to catch the inconsistencies, but this was more than just spotting numbers that didn't add up. It was about understanding the bigger picture, the delicate balance of power, business, and loyalty that held the Moretti empire together. Lena's eyes narrowed as she identified the first major issue in the contract. The terms were too vague, too open to interpretation. She knew that if this clause were executed, it would leave Victor vulnerable to legal challenges. There were other clauses, too, clauses that had been slipped in under the guise of routine business agreements, but upon closer inspection, they were loaded with traps. She made a note in the margins, then continued reading. With each page, the weight of the task ahead of her grew heavier. She was being asked to protect not just the business, but the entire family, including Victor himself. The responsibility was enormous, but Lena knew she couldn't hesitate. She had already come too far. After what felt like hours, Lena set the papers down and looked up at Victor. He was watching her closely, waiting for her analysis. "There's a pattern here," she said, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "The contracts are structured in a way that benefits one party at the expense of the other. These clauses could bankrupt the family or leave us exposed to outside forces." Victor's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening as he processed her words. "I knew something was wrong," he said quietly, "but I couldn't put my finger on it." Lena continued, "You need to act quickly. If these deals go through, they'll put everything we've worked for in jeopardy." Victor nodded, his expression hardening. "Thank you, Lena," he said. "I knew I could count on you." Lena felt a rush of satisfaction, but it was fleeting. The weight of the situation was not lost on her. This was just the beginning. The Moretti family's future was on the line, and she was now at the center of it all. She had made her choice, and there was no going back. She had to stay focused, keep her wits sharp, and be ready for whatever came next. This world was dangerous, and Lena knew that better than anyone. But she also knew that she was ready. Lena sat at her desk in the small office Victor had provided for her, the papers scattered in front of her more than just business documents. They were pieces of a puzzle she was now responsible for solving. Her mind raced as she sifted through the contracts and reports, each word she read adding more weight to the role she had found herself in. The Moretti family's future rested on her decisions, and the thought that she could shape it, however small her part, made her pulse quicken. It had been days since she had uncovered the discrepancies in the contracts, but the sense of urgency had not subsided. She had reported her findings to Victor, who had promised to take swift action. But now, as she sat alone with the files, the realization hit her. She was more involved in this than ever before. Lena had thought that being a part of Victor's world meant understanding his operations from a distance, but it was becoming clear that she was no longer just an observer. She had a seat at the table now, and her ability to navigate this world would define her future. The phone on her desk buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. She reached for it, already knowing who it was. "Lena," Victor's voice came through the line, steady but with an edge of urgency she hadn't heard before. "I need you in my office." There was no time for hesitation. She had learned long ago that when Victor called, it was because something important was happening. She stood up, grabbed the papers she had been reviewing, and walked down the familiar hallway to his office. As she approached, her mind raced with possibilities. Was it about the contracts? Had Victor found something new? She entered the room to find Victor standing by the window, his posture tense, his gaze fixed on the city skyline. The atmosphere in the room was different today. There was a quiet intensity to it, one that made Lena's heart race. She had seen Victor like this before, but it had always been in moments of crisis, and she knew this wasn't going to be any different. "You've been busy, I see," Victor said without turning around, his voice low. Lena nodded as she walked toward the desk. "I've been reviewing everything you asked me to," she said. "I found more discrepancies, Victor." Some of them are bigger than we thought. He turned to face her then, his dark eyes narrowing slightly. How big? He asked, his voice calm but serious. Lena exhaled slowly, placing the papers on his desk. It's not just a few numbers out of place, she said. It's about who's behind these deals. The contracts are being manipulated in ways that could hurt the family. We need to act fast. Victor walked over to the desk, his face set in stone as he skimmed the documents she had placed before him. He remained silent for a long moment, absorbing the gravity of her words. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of something deeper. I had a feeling about this, he said, looking at her. And I'm glad you're here to help me see it through. We can't afford to be caught off guard again. His gaze softened just slightly, but there was no mistaking the weight of his words. You've proven yourself, Lena, he continued. And now I need you to take a more active role in handling this. I need you to lead the investigation. I want you to find out who's behind these deals and what their motives are. Lena's heart skipped a beat. She had expected responsibility, but this was more than she had anticipated. She wasn't just reviewing contracts anymore. She was now leading the charge to uncover the truth. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice betraying a hint of surprise. Victor's eyes locked onto hers, a glint of approval in them. I'm sure, he said simply. You've shown me you can handle it. You've proven your loyalty. Now it's time to show me your strength. Lena nodded, feeling the weight of the task ahead settle in. This wasn't just about being a part of the Moretti family anymore. This was about protecting its future, and with that came the kind of power she had never thought she would hold. The responsibility was immense, but Lena was no longer the timid maid she once was. She had been given the tools, the trust, and the opportunity to rise, and she would not waste it. As she turned to leave Victor's office, her mind was already working through the steps she needed to take. She would need to gather more information, observe everyone closely, and make decisions that could shape the future of the family. She wasn't sure where this would all lead, but she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back. She was in the heart of it now, and nothing could shake her resolve. The world she had once feared was now the world she was navigating, and she was determined to succeed. Lena sat alone in her office, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. It had only been a few weeks since Victor had trusted her with more responsibility, but each day felt like a test. She was no longer just a maid, no longer a faceless member of the household. She was deeply embedded in the Moretti family's operations, trusted with their most sensitive dealings. The files in front of her were a constant reminder of the stakes, each one a piece of the puzzle she was trying to solve. As the head of the legal and financial review, Lena had been asked to look into the discrepancies she had uncovered in the family's business dealings. And the deeper she dug, the more she realized how much she had yet to learn. These weren't just small mistakes or oversights. There were deliberate missteps and manipulations that had been hidden for years. If she wasn't careful, those mistakes could bring everything crashing down. The thought of what was at risk gnawed at her as she flipped through the documents. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. Her relationship with Victor had shifted, and she knew it was because of her ability to see what others had missed. Victor trusted her now, perhaps more than anyone else in his organization. That trust was both an honor and a burden. She needed to prove that she was worthy of it. As she worked late into the night, the mansion around her was quiet, the only sound the rustling of papers and the occasional creak of the old house settling. She glanced at the clock, almost midnight. She had been at this for hours, but there was still so much to go through. Victor's words echoed in her mind. I'm counting on you. It wasn't just a passing comment, it was a commitment. And Lena couldn't afford to let him down. She had made a decision when she first took on this role. She would give everything she had to this family, to Victor's vision. She would prove that she was more than just someone who cleaned the mansion. She would prove that she had the intelligence, the grit, and the loyalty to lead. Her fingers paused over the next file, and her mind wandered briefly to the other members of the family. It had been clear from the start that not everyone in the Moretti family shared Victor's ideals. There were whispers of betrayal, of secrets that were buried deep within the family's operations. As Lena had gone through the reports, she had found evidence of lies, of people manipulating the system for their own gain. And, as much as she had wanted to trust them, the truth was undeniable. There were cracks in the foundation, and she was the only one who could see them. The thought of exposing them was daunting. Victor had made it clear that this kind of information was dangerous. If the wrong person found out what she knew, it could lead to more than just financial ruin. It could mean the end of the Moretti family's empire. And yet, despite the risk, Lena knew that she had to act. She couldn't stand by and allow the family she had come to serve, the family that had taken her in and given her a chance, to be destroyed from within. She had to be the one to make sure the empire stayed intact. Lena closed the file in front of her and stood, stretching her arms above her head. She needed a break, even if just for a few minutes. Her mind was buzzing with the weight of the decisions she would have to make. She walked to the window, looking out over the city that had become both her home and the source of her greatest challenge. The view from Victor's mansion was breathtaking, the lights of the city below twinkling like 1,000 stars. But tonight, it didn't bring her comfort. Instead, it reminded her of how high the stakes were, how fragile everything was. She turned away from the window and walked back to her desk. There was no time for distractions. She had a job to do, and she wasn't about to let anything or anyone get in her way. As the days passed, Lena became more and more immersed in the work, poring over the details, following the threads that connected the family's operations. It was a delicate balance, gathering information without drawing attention to herself. She had learned to move like a shadow, quietly gathering the pieces of the puzzle. But every day, the weight of her role became more apparent. She wasn't just in charge of the legal team anymore. She was leading the charge to protect the family's future. The realization that Victor was counting on her was both empowering and terrifying. There were moments when doubt crept in, when she wondered if she was truly capable of handling the responsibility she had been given. But each time she found herself questioning her abilities, she reminded herself of how far she had come. She wasn't the same woman who had first stepped into this mansion. She was stronger, smarter, and more capable than she had ever imagined. One evening, after another long day of work, Lena received a call from Victor. He was in the middle of a meeting, but needed to speak with her urgently. She made her way to his office, her heart beating faster with each step. As she entered, she found Victor standing by the window, looking out over the city. He turned as she walked in, his gaze meeting hers. "Lena," he said, his voice serious. "There's something we need to address. A decision needs to be made, and I want you to be the one to make it." Lena's pulse quickened. What was he asking her to do? She stepped closer, waiting for him to continue. "There are people within the family who are questioning your loyalty," Victor said, his voice steady. "And I need to know where you stand. I need to know if you're with us, completely." Lena's mind raced. She had known that not everyone would approve of her position, but hearing Victor say it so directly left her feeling vulnerable. She wasn't just serving the family anymore. She was part of it, and with that came the weight of her own loyalty. She had to choose, not just for herself, but for the future of everything they had worked for. And she would make the decision with her eyes wide open. "I'm with you, Victor," she said firmly. "I'm with this family." Victor nodded, the faintest hint of approval crossing his features. "I knew I could count on you," he said quietly. "Now, let's make sure that we don't lose what we've worked so hard to build." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lena stood tall, ready for whatever came next. Lena stood before the mirror in her small office, her reflection staring back at her with an intensity she had never before seen. The weight of the past few days hung over her, heavier than she could have anticipated. The decisions she had made, the alliances she had formed, and the responsibilities she now held had brought her to this point, standing at the crossroads of a future she had never imagined for herself. She wasn't the same woman who had first walked through the Moretti mansion's grand doors. She was someone new, someone forged by the fires of the choices she had made and the loyalty she had pledged. She took a deep breath, adjusting her suit jacket as she prepared for the meeting ahead. The family's future, Victor's future, rested in her hands now. The decisions she had to make were far from easy, but she couldn't back down. Not now. She had proven her worth time and time again, but each new day seemed to present a challenge even greater than the last. She had already uncovered corruption within the family, hidden motives behind business deals, and betrayal among those closest to Victor. But even now, as she prepared for what could be one of the most important meetings of her life, she knew that there was no turning back. She was in this, deeply in this, and there was no escape. With a final look at her reflection, she turned away from the mirror and walked toward the door. As she stepped out into the hallway, Her mind raced with the details of the upcoming discussion. Victor had summoned her to his office once again. He had a plan, and he wanted her to be part of it. He needed her, just as she had come to need him. The dynamic between them had shifted, transformed into something more than just a working relationship. There was an unspoken bond now, a mutual understanding that they were both in this together, for better or for worse. As Lena walked toward Victor's office, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. She had started as a maid, someone overlooked by everyone in the mansion. But now, she was someone who had been entrusted with the family's most sensitive matters, someone whose opinions and decisions mattered. She had earned Victor's trust, and in doing so, she had become an integral part of the Moretti family's future. As she knocked on the door to Victor's office, her heart raced. She had no idea what he was going to ask of her this time, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. "Come in," Victor's voice called from the other side. Lena opened the door and stepped inside, her gaze meeting his. He was standing near the window, looking out over the city, his expression unreadable. "Lena," he said, turning toward her. "I need your help." His words were calm, but there was an edge to his voice that made her stomach tighten. She knew something was coming, something important. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart was beating faster with every second. Victor walked toward her, the weight of his presence filling the room. He paused just a few feet away, his eyes meeting hers. "There are people within this family I don't trust," he said, "and I need you to investigate. I need you to find out who's been undermining the family's operations, who's been hiding their true intentions." Lena's mind raced. She had suspected something like this was coming. She had already uncovered hints of betrayal, whispers in the shadows, but to hear it from Victor himself was different. "I understand," she said, her voice calm. "I'll do it." Victor nodded, his eyes hardening as he spoke again. "I need this information as soon as possible. There are deals in motion that could affect the future of this family, and I can't afford to be caught off guard." He paused, studying her closely. "You're the only one I trust to handle this. I've seen what you're capable of, Lena. Don't let me down." His words hit her like a weight, but she didn't flinch. She had been ready for this moment. She had been prepared to take on whatever responsibility Victor handed her, and now that responsibility was clear. "I won't," she said, her voice firm with resolve. "I'll make sure you have the answers you need." Victor gave a small nod of approval. "Good. I knew I could count on you." He turned back toward the window, his posture relaxed but still vigilant. "This family needs to stay together, Lena. We can't afford any more distractions or weaknesses. I'm relying on you to make sure that doesn't happen." Lena stood there for a moment, processing his words. She had been pulled deeper into the heart of the Moretti family, and there was no going back. As much as she had wanted to believe that her involvement in this world could remain detached, she knew now that her loyalty to Victor was unshakable. The task ahead of her was monumental, and the stakes had never been higher. But Lena was ready. She wasn't the woman she had once been. She was someone stronger now, someone capable of handling the power and the responsibility that had been thrust upon her. As she left Victor's office, her mind focused on the mission at hand. She knew that this was just the beginning. The Moretti family's future was on the line, and she was going to make sure it stayed in the right hands, hers and Victor's.